Hello, I'm Tim Loughton, Member of Parliament for East Worthing and Shoreham, and as promised, I'm producing this podcast on the morning after the big debate and big vote on Syria, which we had just last night, the 2nd of December. Now, I want to explain why I voted with the government and many other opposition party members in favour of extending airstrikes from Iraq into Syria. I produced a podcast, as I do on many issues now, before the vote to explain what my intentions were, and now I want to give more details as to why I think that was the right measure to take. It was my own decision, and as many of you know, when we had a vote on going into Syria, joining the conflict just over 2 years ago, I didn't support it at that stage. I thought that the case had not been made. I thought it was very unclear as to what the objectives were, both from a military and a political perspective. And if we had armed various anti-Assad forces at that stage, some of them could indeed have emerged as the ISIL or Daesh target, as we now call it, and who are now the biggest threat facing the planet. And that's what the whole debate and the motion we debated last night was all about. So I didn't do this out of slavishly supporting a whip or supporting the Prime Minister or supporting the government. I thought long and hard about it. I came up with my own decision. I voted with my conscience accordingly, and it's absolutely right that every step of the way I should make my views known and accountable to all of my constituents. This is a contentious subject. I've received many emails about it, the great majority of those emails urging me not to vote in support of military action. But I had several hundred emails. I have 90,000 constituents to take account of, and at the end of the day I made the decision that I did. Voting on things like military action is one of the hardest things that MPs have to do. Many new MPs, just elected some 6 months ago, in their speeches yesterday said how this is one of the most difficult things that's confronted them in their time as an MP already, whether it's voting on sending British servicemen and women into a war zone in the line of danger, or whether it's voting on matters of conscience like euthanasia, around genetic modification, other issues like these. These are big issues that MPs have to wrangle with their consciences over, consult and listen to their constituents, absolutely, but at the end of the day make a decision based on what we think is best, one, for our country, and two, for our constituents. And that's why I voted the way I did. So I want to thank everybody for all the emails. I read all those emails. What I was impressed with is that a lot of those emails were personal emails. People had taken the trouble to write in their own terms as to why they thought that action was right, or in more cases was wrong. As you know, I'm not usually impressed by circular letter writing or email campaigns, but people showed real passion in some of the comments that they sent to me, and I'm glad that the vast majority of them were respectful, were civilised, were well argued. A few people, alas, still think that their views count for more than anybody else's and that they have a God-given right to be rude and abusive. That doesn't hold their case. The vast majority of constituents who wrote to me, I thought, wrote in impressive, impassioned terms. So I hope whatever you thought about the way I voted, that you respect the reasons for why I voted the way that I did. I'm always available to my constituents, you know that. Most Saturday mornings I'm at A Street Surgery. Many people have been to speak to me over the last few weekends to give me their views, to ask me for my views and my reasoning as well. So that's the way democracy works. It works both ways. Whether you like the decision or that I've made, I hope you will realise why I made it and that I have a democratic mandate from the people who elected me to make that. So in light of the debate and those comments, these are my reasons for why I voted the way I did, and I split them up into 6 main headings. And those who voted on the same side with me were all but 7 Conservatives, some 66 Labour MPs, the majority of Liberal Democrat MPs, most of the Unionist MPs as well. And the final result was 397 votes in favour of extending action to Syria, and 223 against. So a decisive majority, but clearly an awful lot of people who took a different view. So first, let's be clear as to exactly what we were voting on last night and what we've now committed ourselves to do. This wasn't about declaring war. This wasn't like Iraq and other votes in the past where it's effectively triggered military action to invade or join a coalition force of invasion of another country. And I think what it was really important to remember, there were big mistakes made over Iraq. One of the reasons we now have votes by convention on military action is because many of us feel that when we were given a case for war to invade Iraq by Tony Blair, we were misled. And the weapons of mass destruction, the 45-minute warnings, which subsequently turned out not to be true, I think did a lot to undermine the confidence in a government to make a case for committing British troops to military action, and that we should blindly support it. Now we have a proper debate, we have a proper vote in this place in the House of Commons before military action happens. And 15 months ago we had another vote. That vote approved by 524 votes to 43 that we should commit British airstrikes in Iraq. Now what we actually committed to yesterday was not to invade Syria, not to start action against Daesh. It was to extend the existing action from Iraq into Syria. Action already being carried out by American, by Australian, by French and by other Arab nations across a border which has now become completely academic. Daesh do not recognise the border between Syria and Iraq. Their heartland, their base is now in Syria. We've been driving them back with the help of the RAF and military advisors from Britain in Iraq. But in Syria, that's where their heartland is. There was no logic in us being able to go along with military action through RAF airstrikes, of which there have been 1,600 sorties, of which almost 400 have involved weaponry. And yet, the minute we get to the Syrian border, effectively our planes had to turn back. And there were examples given by the Prime Minister yesterday of where there were friendly forces involved on the ground just across the border in Syria, taking on Daesh, where military intervention by an RAF fighter plane could have helped, and yet we weren't allowed to because it was a few miles across the border. That makes no sense at all. There is no military or political logic in that. So what we did yesterday was purely to extend the theatre of military activity involving, in this case, British fighter planes. It's not an instant solution, of course it's not. This is a deeply complex situation happening in Syria and Iraq. There are no easy solutions, there are no quick solutions. There will be casualties, military and civilian, I'm afraid, on all sides. Having said that, I think the capability that the RAF bring is some of the, if not the best, military capability in the world. So the first reason is that the current status quo was just not logical, and if we're serious about taking the fight against Daesh, then we need to take it to the snake's head, as it's being called, which happens to be in Syria at the moment. Now the second big issue, and the question that many people have raised, will Britain getting involved in action now in Syria as well as Iraq make UK citizens, both at home and abroad, any safer? Well, again, there's no logic in that argument, because we have been involved in action in Iraq for the last 15 months. We are not declaring military action on a new enemy. That action has been going on for 15 months in Iraq with the help of British service personnel for the last 15 months. So there is no reason why it should make the situation any more risky for us. But we are already in the top tier of targets for the Daesh terrorists. We've already foiled no fewer than 7 attacks in this country, hatched by Daesh and its supporters. There's another important part of this, the effort by the security intelligence services in the UK to keep us safe here. But this is not just about getting involved in some civil war. It's certainly not about regime change. It's about defending British people and British interests at home and abroad. And if we look back at the chronology, people saying, well, now the RAF are getting into Syria, it's going to make us much more of a target. Well, let's look at the chronology of when those Al-Qaeda terrorists targeted the Twin Towers in the United States. That was before the US and Allied forces went into Afghanistan, where those training camps for Al-Qaeda were taking place. And for those people, and I single out Ken Livingstone, who says that the terrorist atrocities we've seen, those terrorist atrocities we saw on the streets of London on 7/7 or in Paris and other places, that they are in some way the fault of Britain, America, French military action. Those terrorist atrocities are the fault and responsibility of nobody other than the terrorists who seek to kill and maim and blow up innocent civilians, be it on the streets of London, Paris, New York, or wherever else in the world. This is an international terrorist organisation we are dealing with. Only a few months ago, 30 Britons were killed by them on the beaches of Tunisia. 130 innocent civilians, many of them young people, killed in Paris. 224 Russian holidaymakers killed over Egypt. 178, again, innocent civilians recently killed in Beirut on peace marches in Ankara. This is an international terrorist organisation who threatens British interests and British people, not just in Syria or in Iraq, but around the globe. And we need to take the fight to their heartlands. And if I could just single out one speech from yesterday, of which there were many impassioned speeches on all sides, I'd urge people to look at the speech made by Hilary Benn, not a member of my party, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, who spoke at the end of the debate and gave one of the best speeches I've heard. In the space of 15 minutes, I think summed up the position very well. And in terms of the enemy we are facing, he said this: we are faced by fascists, not just their calculated brutality, but their belief that they are superior to every single one of us in this chamber tonight and all of the people that we represent. They hold us in contempt. They hold our values in contempt. They hold our belief in tolerance and decency in contempt. They hold our democracy in contempt. And what we know about fascists is that they need to be defeated. We must now confront this evil. I think that summed up the case for why I voted, and the majority of members of Parliament voted yes in the House of Commons last night, and we need to take this fight to the heartlands of Daesh. Now, my third consideration is those people, again, quite legitimately have said, by getting involved in airstrikes in Syria, will we not kill innocent civilians? Well, of course, there is no risk-free option when you're talking about military action. But so far there have been 1,600 sorties by RAF pilots in Iraq over the last 15 months. We have some of the best precision weaponry. The Brimstone missile, operated by the most skilled and professional military personnel in the world. There have been no reported cases of civilian casualties as a result of those airstrikes by RAF pilots. That's not to say there won't be, but we have gone to great lengths to make sure that they are very finely honed and targeted strikes with clear targets. And we're not just talking about taking out the terrorists themselves, we're not just talking about Raqqa, a town of 600,000 people, which is right at the heart of the Daesh operation. But RAF pilots will be doing, as they have been in Iraq, taking out important supply routes. Daesh are extended over a large part of Syria and Iraq. They are financed by oil from northern Syria. We need to take out some of those oil fields. We need to take out those supply routes. We need to take out their sources of financing. There is a lot of work that can be done before you actually look at their heartlands where there are more civilians themselves as well. But for those who say, will we not be killing innocent civilians, just look at the situation already. Tens of thousands of innocent civilians have already lost their lives at the hands, firstly, of President Assad in Syria turning on his own people, but also at the hands of Daesh in Syria and Iraq and further on as well. Let's remember about the Yazidis, the Christian Kurds, who were targeted by Daesh and indiscriminately massacred, a form of genocide if they'd been able to continue before troops and other powers came to their rescue. Their indiscriminate murder, crucifixion, killing, burning of innocent civilians, women, children, primary school aged girls sold into sex slavery by Daesh, the most extraordinary cruelty, the beheadings that they get involved with. These are not people who want to sit down around a table and negotiate. These aren't people who observe the Geneva Convention or anything like that. This is not conventional warfare. They are out to kill us. They are out to destroy our way of life, and that is what we are dealing with. So for those who say that is there not too great a risk of killing civilians, of course there is that risk, but so many civilians are being killed, tortured, maimed, and having their lives completely destroyed already. And as Hilary Benton said, we have a tradition in this country of not just walking by on the other side of the road. The fourth area I just want to touch on is that airstrikes won't achieve the results. And many people raised that yesterday. I agree. Airstrikes alone cannot achieve a final resolution of this conflict and the elimination of Daesh. But in Iraq there has been some success in actually driving back the Daesh forces. I mean, some months ago, literally they were at the gates of Baghdad. So far, with a lot of help from coalition airstrikes and boots on the ground in that case, working with some of the Iraqi Kurds, the Peshmerga military, who are so effective on the ground, over 30% of territory formerly occupied by Daesh is now back in safe hands. Many of the finances have been cut off, but we need to do an awful lot more. We need to question why neighbours such as Turkey seem to be involved in the oil trade. We need to question whether arms have still been coming through from countries like Saudi Arabia. And next week, I shall be helping to host a delegation of Saudi Arabian members of Parliament coming to the House of Commons for a visit and for discussions. And I will certainly be challenging them and taking the opportunity to challenge their record on human rights and the role that they are playing in the whole Syrian-Iraqi crisis at the moment. There are also, though, 60 nations involved in the Vienna process, which started recently, where nations including Britain and France and America and crucially Russia and many of those Arab states around Syria are part of those negotiations to how we have a unified alliance to make sure we drive Daesh out of Syria and Iraq, and how we start to rebuild and reconstruct that country sustainably. So we do need boots on the ground as well, and I absolutely appreciate there has been a key question raised about the intelligence which comes from joint intelligence from this country and from America and others, that there's something like 70,000 moderate Muslim fighters who are currently involved around Syria in trying to bring down the Assad regime, and that in some way they will be part of the ground force, the boots on the ground that we will need when we push Daesh back and hopefully push them out of the country altogether. There are fears that those numbers are quite flaky, and I agree. This is not based on concrete information. It's a very fluid situation. There are something like 25,000 Free Syria army troops, many of them former Syrian troops loyal to the government who have now defected. But in addition, there's another 20,000 or so Syrian Kurds, and we know how effective the Iraqi Kurds have been, and they've retaken Sinjar and other key towns in northern Syria, they've retaken Kobani. Now, these are the sorts of people that we will need to bring together, but also I think at the end of the day, we will need to have boots on the ground involving other neighbouring Muslim countries, countries like Jordan, countries like the United Arab Emirates, and others who have got skilled military personnel who can be part of a boots on the ground force. Ultimately, there may be a case for Western troops to be involved as well. Personally, I don't want to repeat the sort of mistakes that we did have in places like Iraq, and I think ultimately it will be most effective if we can rely on moderate Sunni Muslim countries to be part of that military force. If further military action is required of the UK, then the Prime Minister has made it absolutely clear he will come back to the House of Commons. We will have further debates and discussions and a vote on whether it's appropriate or not, and that's the right way to go. But the reason for these airstrikes is not as a quick solution, it's not, but it's all part of the degrading and disruption attempt against Daesh, in league with the intelligence operation and everything else we can do to drive them back. It's not going to be easy because we're facing two enemies. We need to get rid of President Assad, who has sparked off all this civil war in Syria, at the same time as getting rid of the international threat that is the Daesh terrorist organisation. We need to have a transition plan. There are many questions still outstanding, but this is an important movement to making sure we have a concerted effort to make sure we bring about change. But we will need a long-term joined-up solution. And let's not forget as well that whilst all this is going on, the United Kingdom, of which I am very proud, has invested £1.2 billion, the second largest bilateral donor in the whole world, helping displaced Syrian refugees in and around Syria. And of course last year I went to visit the Zaatari refugee camp just across the border in Jordan, 85,000 Syrian refugees, and saw the amazing effort that British aid money, your money, my money, taxpayers' money, is contributing to making the lives of those people who've been through so traumatic experiences that much more comfortable in safe havens, not just in the refugee camps, but many of them men moving on to private rented accommodation, providing schooling. In the Zaatari camp, 85% of the kids there are getting that crucial education and schooling in the 5 schools on that camp alone. We need to continue that effort, and we're also taking some of the most vulnerable refugees from those camps, 20,000 over the next few years, coming to the UK. That's a record I'm very proud of. 2 more considerations, and again the question, why us and why now? Well, as Hilary Benn again said, we have a tradition in this country that we don't walk on by. Can we stand aside while all this murder and terrorism inside Syria and on our own streets in Western Europe is taking place? Can we contract out the defence of UK citizens to other countries who are already engaged, like America and France? And I believe the answer to that question is no. And if not now, when? Should we wait until the events in Paris a few weeks ago are repeated on the streets of London? Fortunately, we've been able to avoid that up to now. We've been called upon by our close allies, by people like France, by America, by friendly Arab nations, by Australia involved in military action already in Syria, and by Turkey to join the military operation in Syria. I think we need to show solidarity and resolve, and if we didn't, and if we'd voted no yesterday, I think Daesh would be the first to exploit a weak link that actually the West is not serious about taking on Daesh. But there's another reason, an added reason, I think a very powerful reason, and that's in November, the United Nations passed a resolution, Resolution 2249, and paragraph 5 of that resolution says that ISIL constitutes a global and unprecedented threat to international peace and security, and it calls on all member states, and that includes us, to take all necessary measures to prevent and suppress terrorist acts committed specifically by ISIL and to eradicate the safe haven they've established over significant parts of Iraq and Syria. And also under the Article 51 of the UN Charter, we have a right of self-defense. I think that gives a very clear motive for why we need to act, and we need to use all possible means, of which airstrikes over Syria are just one part, and we need to do it urgently. Now, the sixth and my final consideration here is also about, are we encouraging more homegrown extremists? And we have seen many hundred British citizens, including some teenagers, who have, for some misguided reason, gone across to Syria to join up with the Daesh forces. The radicalisation that has happened to some of our young people is one of the most worrying things going on at the moment. Now, I'm a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, and we've been carrying out an extensive study into radicalisation. We've been speaking to many of the families, the schools where some of these young people have come from to go to Syria, people from the mosques and the Muslim community. The government has a prevent strategy which is all about trying to counter radicalisation. We need to do an awful lot more. We all have a duty of care to watch out for impressionable young people in particular who are susceptible to the poison often coming from social media and from hate preachers and others in this country. So we have a big effort, a big job of work to be doing in the UK as well. In the last 12 months, something like 300 terrorists have been arrested for terrorism offences. That's an increase of about a third over the previous year. It's important we invest in our police and in our intelligence services, and that was made very clear by George Osborne in the Comprehensive Spending Review last week, with the additional funds now going into those areas, as well as our local police, which I very much welcome. So we have a job to do in Syria, we have a job to do in Iraq, we have a job to do with the wider international community, and we have a job to do with our own citizens as well, to make sure that the poison, the toxic, the preachers of hate do not influence the impressionable minds of young people in this country as well. So those are the 6 areas where I feel that a case has been made, where I think we do need to act, and where I think that the vote in the House of Commons last night was the right vote, and that's why I was happy to lend my vote to it. It was a decisive vote last night. It showed a decisive commitment to extend British military action to the heart of the enemy in Syria, from just across that artificial border now with Iraq. This wasn't a party political vote. I didn't go in supporting the government or the Prime Minister or the Conservative Party. It was the right thing to do in the interest of the country, whatever your thoughts, your views, your political affiliations or none. And I think it was in the best interests of my constituents. I'm not questioning the commitment of those who took a different view and voted a different way to mine. I'm not questioning their commitment to fighting Daesh or to fighting terrorism generally. I respect the considered view that they took, and I hope they respect the considered view, as I hope you do, as one of my constituents, that I took as well. There is no easy or quick solution. This is not going to achieve the result that I'm sure we all want overnight. We are dealing with an unprecedented enemy who does not abide by any rules of international warfare, who does not get involved in negotiation, and is a poison and a threat to the world, the likes of which we've not seen since probably the Nazis. We need to be vigilant overseas, we need to be vigilant at home in the United Kingdom as well. That's the reason I voted the way I did last night. I am always happy to be and should be accountable to my constituents. I am always approachable on these and all other matters. You can always find me at my street surgeries. I get lots of emails all the time, and in the new year I plan to hold a series of public meetings around the constituency for people to come and talk to me about these things, and to talk to me about things like the EU referendum coming up as well. I hope, even if you don't agree with the way I voted, that this podcast has helped give you more reasons why I did vote the way I did, and I hope you respect those reasons, and we can agree to disagree if you don't agree with me, or that you now appreciate exactly why I did do it and that you support the action I've taken. That is democracy. Democracy is something that Daesh don't believe in, and it is the democracy, the free speech, the fact that we can live in safety in this country and in other countries in Europe that is at stake, and that's why last night's vote was so important. Thank you for listening.